You have exactly 10 seconds to explain what you are doing on my kitchen floor at 4 in the morning. The voice came from Nora Vane. No, not that name. She had shed that name with her last employer's household. From Nora Calloway, who stood in the doorway of the scullery in her dressing gown with a candle in one hand and a cast-iron ladle in the other, because the ladle was what she had grabbed in the dark, and she was not yet certain it had been the wrong choice. The kitchen of Elmsworth House was cold at this hour, smelling of yesterday's bread and the faint ghost of tallow, and there was a man on the floor who was clearly trying very hard to look as though he had simply chosen to sit there, as one does, at 4 in the morning, with one hand pressed against his side and his coat torn from shoulder to elbow. He looked up at her. His eyes were the color of old amber, the kind found in museums under glass, and they held an expression she could not immediately name. Somewhere between amusement and the careful stillness of a man who has learned not to move quickly when someone is holding something heavy. 7 seconds, she said. You are counting, he said. I am a governess. I count things for a living. 6. He tilted his head, and something crossed his face. Recognition, she thought. Real recognition, not the polite kind. Nora Calloway, he said. You used to wear your hair differently. The ladle lowered, not because she chose to lower it, but because her arm made the decision before her mind caught up. She knew him. She had known him for exactly 3 days, 6 years ago, on the road between Harwick and the village of Fenn's Cross, when a carriage wheel had broken and a stranger had helped them push it out of the ditch and then walked away into the rain without waiting to be thanked. She had thought about him, at odd intervals, the way one thinks about an unsolved sum. His name, he had told her then, was Callum Brest. A scholar, he had said. Traveling, he had said. She had believed him because there was nothing in his manner that invited disbelief, only a great deal that invited curiosity. Callum Brest, she said now, and the name felt strange in her mouth after 6 years of not saying it. You are bleeding on my employer's kitchen floor. I am aware, he said. I apologize for the inconvenience. The inconvenience, she repeated. Yes, that is the word I would have chosen. She set the ladle on the table with more care than the situation warranted and crouched beside him. The tear in his coat was worse than she had first assessed. She had nursed her younger sisters through fevers and set a broken finger once when there was no surgeon within 10 miles, and she was not a woman who fainted at difficulty. What she noticed, pressing the fabric aside to look at the wound beneath, was that it was already closing. Not healed, not yet, but closing in the way that wounds do not close, not at this speed, not without intervention. She pressed her palm against it anyway, because she was already there, and the alternative was to stand up and pretend she had not seen it. Hold still, she said. I generally do, he said. When someone is pressing their hand against my ribs. Do not make me laugh. I am being competent. He was quiet after that, which she appreciated. She found clean linen in the pantry cupboard, the kind kept for household emergencies, and bound his side with the efficiency of someone who had never had the luxury of panic. He watched her work without flinching, which she also noticed. He did not look like a man who flinched easily. He looked like a man who had simply run out of the capacity for surprise. When she was done, she sat back on her heels and looked at him. You should go, she said. Before the housekeeper wakes. She rises at 5 and she is not a charitable woman. I know, he said. I used to know this house. That was the first strange thing he said. It would not be the last. He stood with some difficulty and considerable dignity, and she walked him to the servants' entrance and watched him disappear into the gray pre-dawn without another word, which was precisely what he had done 6 years ago on the road outside Harwick. She went back to bed and lay awake until the housekeeper's bell rang, thinking about the way a wound had been closing faster than wounds close, and the color of amber eyes in candlelight. She told herself it meant nothing. She had always been good at telling herself things that were not quite true. Nora Calloway had been governess to the Elmsworth household for 14 months. which was longer than either of her previous positions and shorter than she would have liked. The Elmsworth girls, two of them, aged 9 and 11, named Prue and Bess, were clever and difficult in the way that clever children are, and Nora liked them considerably more than she was supposed to admit. Her room was small and faced north, which meant it was cold from October through April, and her salary was adequate without being generous, and she read botanical texts for pleasure, which her previous employers had found eccentric, and the Elmsworth girls found fascinating. She had a single distinguishing habit that she could not explain to anyone's satisfaction, including her own. She kept a small notebook in which she wrote down things she observed that did not fit. Not mysteries exactly, just discrepancies. The housekeeper who never ate in front of others. The clock in the East Corridor that stopped at the same hour every Tuesday. The way Lord Elmsworth, who was not a cruel man, never looked directly at the portrait of his grandmother in the entrance hall. She had written, on the morning after Callum Brest bled on her kitchen floor, a single line. Wound closing, no explanation, eyes too still, knew my name before I gave it. She crossed out the last part. He had known her name because she had introduced herself 6 years ago. That was not a discrepancy. That was simply memory. She left the rest. He was gone for 11 days. On the third day, she found a small bunch of dried lavender on the windowsill of her room, tied with a piece of twine in a knot she did not recognize. On the sixth day, a boy she had never seen delivered a note to the servant's entrance that said only, "The debt has been noted. A friend of your recent guest." On the ninth day, she dreamed about the road outside Harwick, except in the dream the rain was warm, and Callum Brest stood at the edge of it and said, very clearly, "You should not have touched the wound, Nora. I am sorry." She woke at 3 in the morning and wrote it down. Then she crossed it out. Then she wrote it again. On the 11th day, she found him in the garden. He was standing near the old stone wall that separated the Elmsworth grounds from the lane, and he was reading a letter, and he looked, she searched for the word, diminished. Not physically. He was still tall and composed and dressed in a coat that had been mended at the shoulder, but there was something in the set of his expression that had not been there before, a tightness around the mouth that she associated with people carrying news they had not yet found a way to deliver. "You have been avoiding me," she said, because she was a governess and had learned that directness saved time. "I have been deciding how to begin," he said. "Begin what?" He folded the letter and put it in his coat. "I owe you an explanation." "You owe me several," she said, "but I would start with the wound." He looked at her then, fully, in the way he had not quite looked at her that night in the kitchen, when he had been managing pain and she had been managing composure. In daylight, his eyes were still amber, and still too still, and she had the sudden clear sensation of standing at the edge of something she had not measured. "The wound has healed," he said. "I noticed," she said. "It had already begun when I was still binding it. That is not how wounds work, Callum." A pause. A very particular pause, the kind that is not silence but the space before a decision. "No," he said. "It is not." He did not explain further that day. He asked instead about the girls, about whether Prue had stopped arguing with her mathematics tutor, about whether the East Garden wall had been repaired. Small questions that told her he knew this house better than a passing stranger ought to. She answered them because she was curious, and curiosity had always been stronger in her than caution, and because there was something in the way he asked that was not quite casual. He was checking, she realized. He was checking that things were as they should be. She let him check. And then she said, "The note said something about a debt." His expression did not change, which was itself a change. "What note?" "The one delivered by a boy I had never seen, on the 6th day after you left." She watched him. "It said the debt had been noted. It was from a friend of yours." He was quiet for a long moment. A bird moved in the hawthorn behind the wall. The morning smelled of cold soil and the faint sweetness of something her tongue refused to translate. That, he said at last, is a problem. He came back the following evening, and the evening after that, arriving at the garden wall as the light failed, which she noted was a consistent preference, and filed alongside the other observations in her notebook. He brought her, on the second visit, a copy of a botanical text she had mentioned in passing, not a new copy, but a very old one, the pages soft with use, the margins filled with handwriting she could not read. "Whose notes are these?" she asked. "Mine," he said. She looked at the date on the title page. This was published in 1743. "Yes," he said, and did not elaborate. She put the book under her arm and looked at him with the expression she used when Prue was explaining why she had not completed her French exercises. Patient, attentive, and not remotely persuaded. "You are going to tell me something," she said. "You have been building toward it for 3 evenings. I would rather you simply said it." He sat down on the garden wall, which was not elegant but was apparently necessary. He looked at the lane. He looked at his hands. He looked briefly at the sky in the way people look at things they cannot change. "I am not," he said carefully, "entirely what you would call a natural man." "I had gathered," she said. "I have been alive for a very long time. Longer than the date in that book. Longer than most things you would consider a reliable measure of time." She was quiet. The bird in the hawthorn had gone. The evening had settled into that particular English stillness that is not peaceful but patient. "How long?" she said. "I stopped counting in 1601, he said. "It seemed more practical." She sat down beside him on the wall, because her legs had made the same decision her arm had made in the kitchen, before her mind caught up. "And the wound," she said. "Heals faster than it should." "Yes." "And the notes in the margin." "I was interested in botany for approximately 40 years, he said. "I find interests are easier to hold for a finite period. 40 years feels finite." She opened the book and looked at the handwriting again. It was neat and precise and very slightly archaic in its letter forms. She closed it. "And the debt," she said. He turned to look at her, and this time there was no management in his expression, no careful stillness. He simply looked at her, the way she imagined he looked at things he found genuinely difficult. "When you bound my wound," he said, "you gave your care freely, without asking what I was or what it would cost you. In the world I move in, that constitutes an act of binding, a voluntary oath, though you did not know you were making one. It creates a debt between us that is not merely metaphorical." She stared at him. "I bound your ribs with linen," she said. "I did not sign anything." "No," he said. "You did something more binding than a signature. You helped without condition." She stood up. She stood up because sitting beside him while he told her that her competence had accidentally entangled her in something she had not agreed to was not a posture she was willing to maintain. "That," she said, "is the most profoundly unreasonable thing anyone has ever said to me, and I have been a governess for 9 years." "I know," he said. "I am sorry." "You are sorry?" She turned to face him. "I find a man bleeding on my kitchen floor. I do what any sensible person would do, and now I am— what? Bound? By what mechanism? By what law?" "By a law older than the ones you know," he said quietly. "I did not make it. I would not have chosen it. But I cannot pretend it does not exist simply because it is inconvenient." "Inconvenient?" she said, with a precision that made the word sound like a closing door. "Yes, that is still the word." She took the botanical book and went inside. She sat in her room for an hour with the book open on her lap and did not read a single word of it. Then she opened her notebook and wrote, "He is a vampire. The wound makes sense now. The date in the book makes sense now. The debt does not make sense, and I refuse to accept it until it does." She underlined "refuse" twice. She was still angry in the morning, and the morning after that, and she found it clarifying. The clarity did not last. On the fourth day after Callum's explanation, a woman appeared at the Elmsworth servants' entrance, asking for Nora Calloway by name. She was tall and very pale, and dressed in mourning clothes that had been mourning clothes for so long they had become simply her clothes. She had the same quality of stillness that Callum had, the same amber-adjacent eyes, though hers were darker, the color of old wood rather than old gold. Her name, she said, was Vesper. She did not offer a surname. "You are the woman who bound Callum Breast," Vesper said, without preamble, in the manner of someone who considered preamble a waste of everyone's time. "I am a governess who bandaged a man who was injured," Nora said. "I would do the same for anyone." "That," said Vesper, "is precisely the problem." She was not threatening, exactly. She was the kind of person who does not need to threaten because the threat is implied by the quality of her attention. She looked at Nora the way a scholar looks at a text, assessing, categorizing, deciding on significance. "The debt you created," Vesper said, "has been registered. There are others who know of it, others who would use it, not to harm you, necessarily, but to place pressure on Callum, to compel him. He has spent 2 centuries avoiding entanglements, and you have, quite accidentally, given them one." Nora kept her face entirely composed, which was a skill she had developed over 9 years of employment, and which she was grateful for now. "What do they want?" "They want him to do something he has refused to do," Vesper said. "They believe that through you they can persuade him." "Through me," Nora said. "And if I simply dissolve the debt? Return whatever it is I apparently gave?" Vesper looked at her with something that was almost, but not quite, respect. "If you knew how to do that," she said, "you would not be standing in a servant's entrance asking a stranger." She left without saying goodbye, which Nora thought was at least honest. That evening, Nora did not wait for Callum at the garden wall. She went to the Elmsworth Library instead, which was not large but was thorough, and she began looking for anything that might tell her about voluntary oaths, binding agreements, ancient law, or— she wrote it very small in her notebook, as though someone might see— vampiric custom. She found nothing useful in the library, which did not surprise her. She found a reference in a history of continental folk law to something called a witness bond, which was not quite the same thing but was adjacent enough to be interesting. She also sent a note to the one person she thought might know more, a retired schoolmistress named Agatha Plum, who had been her mentor at the teaching college and who had, on one memorable occasion, mentioned in passing that she had once spent 3 years cataloging the private library of a family in Prague that no one spoke about at dinner. Nora had not known what to make of that at the time. She thought she might know now. Agatha's reply came in 2 days, which was fast for a woman who lived in the north and professed to find correspondence a burden. It said, "The witness bond is not reversible in the common sense. It can be transmuted, changed in nature without being broken. The conditions for transmutation vary by tradition. I would come to you, but my knee is worse. Come to me if you can. Bring the text you mentioned. A.P." Nora read the letter 3 times. Then she went to find Callum at the garden wall and said, without greeting, "I have been investigating." He looked at her with an expression that she was beginning to recognize, the one where he was trying to decide whether to be concerned or impressed, and had not yet resolved it. "I see," he said. "I know about the witness bond," she said. "I know it can be transmuted. I know you have been refusing to do something for someone, and that they intend to use me to change your mind. I would like to know what they want you to do." He was quiet for a moment. "How did you find out about the witness bond?" "I ask someone who knows things," she said. "What do they want?" He sat down on the wall again. He had, she noticed, a habit of sitting when things became difficult, as though he had learned long ago that standing through everything was not sustainable. "There is a man," he said. "His name is Rowan Creed. He has been part of our community for a long time. He has also been using his position to exert influence over people who cannot refuse him." "I refused him," some years ago, when he asked me to help him acquire certain documents that would have given him authority over a number of families who had done nothing to deserve his attention. And now he knows about the debt, she said. Now he knows about the debt, Callum confirmed. And Vesper, she is not his ally. She came to warn you, but Creed himself will not be far behind. Nora absorbed this. What does he want you to do now? The same thing he wanted before, Callum said. The documents still exist. He still wants them, and now he believes he has something to persuade me with. Me, she said. You, he said, and the word had a quality in his mouth that she did not examine too closely. She looked at the garden wall, at the old stone that had been there longer than the house, probably, and said, I am going to visit my former teacher. She may know how to transmute the bond. I think you should come with me. He looked at her. You are not frightened, he said. I am extremely frightened, she said. I am simply also practical. Are you coming or not? He came. Agatha Plum lived in a stone house in the north that smelled of old paper and something herbal that Nora had never been able to identify. She was 73, small, sharp-eyed, and entirely unsurprised to see Callum Brest, which Nora found interesting. I thought you were in the Baltic, Agatha said to him, by way of greeting. I was, he said, for a while. She looked at Nora. You found him bleeding on a kitchen floor, I assume. How did you know? Nora said. Because that is how it always starts, Agatha said and led them inside. They sat in a room that was more books than walls, and Agatha served tea that was too strong and did not apologize for it. And Callum held his cup without drinking from it, which Agatha also did not comment on. She had clearly been in this situation before, or one sufficiently similar. The witness bond, Agatha said, settling into her chair with the deliberateness of someone whose knee was genuinely bad, is not a trap. It is a recognition. It says, this person saw me at my most vulnerable and chose to help. In the old tradition, that carries weight. The problem is that weight can be used as leverage by those who know how. Rowan Creed, Callum said. Yes. Agatha looked at him. He has been collecting these bonds for 40 years. He finds them or creates them, and then he uses them. He is very good at it. Can the bond be transmuted? Nora asked. Yes, Agatha said, but the transmutation requires both parties to act. It is not something one person can do alone, and it is not something that can be done under duress. It requires a genuine, voluntary exchange, not of blood, not of vows in the conventional sense, but of something each person holds privately, a truth, a secret, something that costs them. Nora looked at Callum. He was looking at his untouched tea. And if Creed interferes before we can do it? She asked. Then the bond remains as it is, Agatha said, and he uses it. They were back in the carriage, a hired one, nothing grand, when Creed found them. He was waiting at the crossroads outside Agatha's village, which told Nora that he had been watching, or that someone had told him, or both. He was a lean man with colorless eyes and the kind of patience that has nothing gentle in it. He had two companions who stood slightly behind him and slightly to each side, and all three of them had the quality of stillness that Nora now recognized. The carriage stopped because the road was blocked, and Nora stepped out before Callum could suggest otherwise, because she had decided, somewhere in the last several days, that being managed was not something she intended to allow. Miss Calloway, Creed said. He had a pleasant voice, which she found deeply suspicious. I hope your visit was productive. Reasonably, she said. Mr. Creed? He looked at Callum, who had come to stand beside her. You know what I want, Creed said. I do, Callum said, and my answer has not changed. Your circumstances have, Creed said. He looked at Nora again, and his gaze was the kind that categorizes rather than sees. Miss Calloway is a governess, a woman of modest means and modest position. It would be a shame if her employer received information suggesting she had been involved in irregular activities, nocturnal meetings, unchaperoned travel with an unknown man. Nora felt the shape of what he was doing with perfect clarity. He was not threatening her life or her safety. He was threatening her livelihood, her reputation, the careful structure she had built over 9 years of careful work. He was threatening the thing she could least afford to lose. "You would ruin her employment," Callum said, and his voice had gone very flat. "I would simply share what I know," Creed said, "which is a great deal, now that the bond is registered." Nora looked at Creed for a moment. She thought about the botanical text with the 1743 date. She thought about Agatha's words, "something that costs them." She thought about the notebook in her pocket, and the line she had written and underlined twice. "Mr. Creed," she said, "I would like to ask you a question." He looked mildly surprised, which she suspected was not an expression he wore often. "Ask." "The families whose documents you want," she said. "They are bound to you as well, are they not? By witness bonds or something similar. That is how you have managed them for 40 years, not by force, by leverage." His expression did not change. It did not need to. The stillness of it was answer enough. "I thought so," she said. She reached into her coat pocket and produced her notebook. "I have been keeping notes, not about you specifically. I did not know you existed until recently, but about the mechanism, about how witness bonds work and how they can be transmuted and what the conditions are." She looked at him steadily. "I also have the name of the authority in Prague who maintains the registry of bonds. Agatha Plum was kind enough to provide it, and I have a letter which I wrote this morning before we left, addressed to that authority, describing the way you have been using registered bonds as instruments of coercion." She did not have the letter. She had the intention of the letter, and she had the registry name, which Agatha had indeed provided, and she had the very firm conviction that a man who operated through leverage would recognize leverage when it was applied to him. Creed looked at her notebook. He looked at her. He looked at Callum, who was looking at Nora with an expression she had not seen on him before, something open and startled, and underneath both of those, deeply warm. "The registry," Creed said slowly, "does not involve itself in—" "The registry," Nora said, "involves itself in whatever the registry chooses to involve itself in. I do not actually know the full scope of its authority, but you do. And I think you are calculating right now whether I am bluffing." A long pause. The wind moved through the hedgerow beside the road, carrying the smell of turned earth and something green and cold. "I am not bluffing about the letter," she said. "I am bluffing about having already sent it, but the distinction will cease to matter in approximately 36 hours. Creed looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Callum. Then he stepped aside. "This is not finished," he said. "No," Nora agreed. "But it is finished for today, and today is what we have." She got back into the carriage. Callum got in after her. The carriage moved. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Then Callum said, "You were bluffing." "Partially," she said. "You did not have the letter." "No. But I have Agatha's contact, and I will write the letter the moment we return, and it will be sent before morning." So the bluff had a very short shelf life. He looked at her. She looked out the window. The road was ordinary and brown and very English, and the sky had gone the color of old pewter. "Nora," he said. "Don't," she said. "Don't thank me yet. We still need to transmute the bond before he finds another angle." "I know," he said. "I was not going to thank you." "What were you going to say?" He was quiet for a moment. "I was going to say that I have been alive for a very long time, and I have met very few people who respond to a supernatural extortionist with a bluff and a notebook." "I am a governess," she said. "We are trained to improvise." He made a sound that was, unmistakably, a laugh. It was short and a little rusty, as though it had not been used recently, and it was the most human thing she had heard from him. She did not say that. She looked out the window and allowed herself, privately, to be pleased. They returned to Elmsworth House as the lamps were being lit. Nora wrote the letter to the Prague registry that night. A real letter, precise and documented, describing Creed's pattern of using registered bonds as instruments of coercion. She sealed it and addressed it and gave it to the Morning Post with the particular satisfaction of someone who has converted a bluff into a fact. Then she went to the garden wall, because Callum was there, and because there was still the matter of the transmutation. The evening was cold and clear, the kind of cold that makes the stars look closer than they are. She could smell frost in the air, and the last of the year's dried grass, and, faintly, beneath both, something she had come to associate with him, something like old paper and open air. Agatha said it requires a truth, she said. Something that costs. Yes, he said. You first, she said, since you have considerably more practice with difficult things. He looked at the stars for a moment. Then he said, 6 years ago, on the road outside Harwick, I helped push a carriage out of a ditch because I had been walking that road for 3 days, trying to decide whether to simply stop, not to harm myself, just to walk until I found somewhere I did not feel the weight of centuries. I had been alone for a very long time, and I had convinced myself that it was preferable. He paused. And then a woman with a broken carriage looked at me as though I were simply a person who had appeared when needed, and said thank you in a way that sounded like she meant it, and walked away. And I thought, perhaps not yet. Perhaps there is still something worth. He stopped. That is the truth. I came back to this house because I remembered you. I did not plan to bleed on your kitchen floor. Nora was quiet for a moment. The frost was settling on the grass, and she could hear it, very faintly, the way you can hear silence when it has texture. My truth, she said, is that I have been a governess for 9 years, and I have told myself every year that it is sufficient, that the work is good, and the children need someone, and it is enough to be useful. She looked at her hands. I have a notebook full of observations I have never shown anyone, because I was afraid they would think me peculiar. I have spent 9 years making myself small enough to fit the space I was given, and when I found you on that kitchen floor, the first thing I felt was not alarm, it was relief, that something had finally happened that was larger than the space I had made for myself. The silence after that was not empty. It was the kind of silence that has weight and warmth, the kind that two people make together without deciding to. Is that enough? She asked. For the transmutation? I think, Callum said slowly, that it is more than enough. Or, he held out his hand, not dramatically, not as a gesture of supernatural significance, simply as a man holds out his hand to a woman he would like to take somewhere, or to stay somewhere with, or simply to hold on to for a while. She took it. His hand was cooler than hers, and very still, and she felt, in the moment of contact, something that she could only describe later as a door closing quietly behind her, not trapping her in, but shutting out the cold. The bond, she said. Is it changed? He said. Yes. What is it now? He considered. Something voluntary, he said. Something that belongs to both of us equally. She thought about that. She thought about the notebook in her pocket, and the letter in the Morning Post, and the bluff at the crossroads that had not quite been a bluff. She thought about Prue's French exercises, and Bess's habit of asking questions that had no good answers, and the north-facing room that was cold from October through April, and the botanical text with the 1743 date that was currently on her nightstand. I am still a governess, she said. I know, he said. I have opinions about botany and a notebook that I intend to keep. I would expect nothing less, he said. I have been interested in botany myself, intermittently. We might disagree. We will definitely disagree, she said. I have very strong views about classification. So do I, he said. They are probably different from yours. Good, she said. I find agreement tedious. He looked at her with those amber eyes that had once held centuries of careful distance, and she saw, with the clarity